A very good morning. Today we are going to discuss about the trigeminal nerve, the trigeminal nerve anatomy, and all the branches of the trigeminal nerve, as it is very important. So I'm going to basically divide this into three parts. The first, I will tell you what are the nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, and I will explain about the first division of trigeminal nerve, that is the ophthalmic nerve, and then I will discuss about the in the next part I will discuss about the maxillary, and in the third part I will discuss about the mandibular nerve. Okay, now before moving into the trigeminal nerve, you should know what is this orange color structure over here. This is my trigeminal ganglion. Fine. So this is the trigeminal ganglion. This is very important. This is where the fibers from the nucleus, it goes and it travels to various aspects that we are going to discuss. Okay, there are basically three very important nucleus for this trigeminal. One is the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. It is very important. The spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, and you have this is your since it is located in the pons, and in the mid portion I call it as central or principal pontine nucleus, and here I have another nucleus in my midbrain, so I call this nucleus as mesencephalic nucleus. Fine. So basically you have three nucleus: the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, and you have the principal nucleus, and you have the mesencephalic nucleus. Fine. So if you look at what are the function of these three nucleus, the major function is going to be provided by the spinal nucleus. So what it does, the spinal nucleus, it is responsible for the touch, pain, temperature, pressure, and also some proprioception. Fine. So the spinal nucleus of trigeminal is very important as far as the trigeminal nucleuses are concerned. So it is responsible for the touch, pain, temperature, pressure, and proprioception. Okay, what is this pontine nucleus, the central or the principal pontine nucleus? What is its function? It's basically responsible for some proprioception. Fine. It is also responsible for proprioception and touch. Okay, so if we move to the mesencephalic nucleus, the mesencephalic nucleus, it functions as, it basically functions as some proprioception. Okay, so this is how basically the nucleus of the trigeminal nerve are classified. You have your spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, you have your central or principal pontine nucleus, and you have your mesencephalic nucleus. Okay, now all these fibers, all these three fibers, your spinal nucleus, your principal pontine nucleus, and your mesencephalic nucleus, they all are going to enter this trigeminal ganglion, isn't it? They are going to enter trigeminal ganglion, and they divide into three main branches, right? So they divide into what is called as the V1 branch, they divide into what is called as the V2 branch, and they also divide into V3 branch, right? So if you look at the V1 branch, which we are going to discuss today, V1 is the ophthalmic division. V1 is the ophthalmic nerve, and this ophthalmic nerve, if you see this structure over here, this is the cavernous sinus. Fine. So it is present between the periosteal layer, which will be present here, as well as the meningeal layer, which will be present here. So it will be present between these layers. This is a cavernous sinus, and this ophthalmic nerve, if you see, it runs along the lateral border of this cavernous sinus, right? So if you look at the maxillary nerve, right, so this maxillary nerve, it also enters along the ophthalmic, along the lateral aspect of your cavernous sinus, and instead of coming out of the cavernous sinus as your ophthalmic nerve does, it somewhere passes down and it enters this foramen. right? So this is your foramen spinosum. And if you look here, your mandibular nerve, as we all know, it enters foramen ovale. Okay, now I'm going to discuss only about ophthalmic nerve in this part. If you look at the ophthalmic nerve, just a minute. Okay, if you look at the ophthalmic nerve, it basically enters, what is this? This is my superior orbital fissure. It basically enters the superior orbital fissure, and then if you see, it divides into 3 branches. Fine. So what are the 3 branches? The first part is your lacrimal. Okay. The second part is going to be your frontal, and the third part is your nasociliary nerves. Right. So the first part, it enters the superior orbital fissure, and the first part is your lacrimal nerve, the second is your frontal nerve, and the third is your nasociliary nerves. Okay. Now once this happens, lacrimal nerve, as we all know, it's going to supply the lacrimal gland. Fine. Okay, just take a closer look at this. Fine. So this is the temporal side of your eyeball, and this is your nasal side. Okay, you have superior rectus, your medial rectus, your lateral rectus, and your inferior rectus. And what is this? This is my common tendinous ring. Right. So I will have my ophthalmic nerve here. Sorry, my oculomotor nerve here. I have the abducen nerve, that is the 6th cranial nerve, and I will have my lacrimal nerve somewhere here, that is on the temporal side. Right. So I will have my frontal nerve just medial to the lacrimal nerve, and also I will have my one more nerve along with that, that is my trochlear nerve. Right. So this is how the nerves are going to run in my eyeball. So what happens? I'll have my lacrimal nerve on the temple side, which is going to supply my lacrimal gland, and I have my frontal nerves just medial to the lacrimal nerve. I have my trochlear nerve just medial to my frontal nerves. Fine. Okay. So now this lacrimal nerve, it goes and supplies to my lacrimal gland, right? Especially on the temporal side of the lacrimal gland. Okay. After supplying that, it also supplies some of my eyelid, my skin over the eyelid. Right. So it also goes and supplies to my skin over my eyelids, and that is how the lacrimal gland is going to end. Fine. So it basically supplies my lacrimal gland and the skin over my eyelid. Fine. Okay. Now moving on to the next part, that is my frontal. If you can remember, there is some trochlear bone. There's some trochlear, and I have my superior oblique muscle attached to my trochlear, isn't it? My superior oblique muscle is attached to the trochlear somewhere here. So why I'm saying this is, it is somewhat related to the frontal nerve. This frontal nerve, right? This frontal nerve, it goes and it divides, right? It divides into 2 branches. One branch runs absolutely superior to this trochlear, and one runs below it. So this part of the frontal nerve, which runs above the trochlear, I call it as supratrochlear. And now what does it supply? Simple. It goes and supplies my skin over the eyelid, as well as it goes and supplies my palpebral conjunctiva. This is my palpebral conjunctiva, right? So, and also it goes and supplies to my skin over the forehead. It also supplies my skin over the forehead. Okay, it's very simple, right? So it is present above this trochlear. I call it a supratrochlear, and it supplies my skin over the eyelid. It supplies my palpebral conjunctiva, and also supplies my skin over my forehead. Okay, that's done and dusted. Now moving on to the second division of my frontal nerve, that is called it as supraorbital. Fine, this supraorbital branch of the frontal nerve, it is very similar to the supratrochlear. It goes and supplies my palpebral conjunctiva, it goes and supplies my skin over the forehead, your skin over the eyelid, and it also supplies the skin over the forehead, but it extends all the way up till my vertex. Fine, it extends all the way up till my vertex. So that is how the frontal nerve is. It is a supratrochlear and it has supraorbital branch which supplies, as I said. Okay, now coming to the very important, the nasociliary branch. Okay, the nasociliary branch, one aspect of my nasociliary branch, it's very simple. As I said, one runs above the trochlear and another one runs below the trochlear. I call it as infratrochlear, as simple as it is, infratrochlear, and it supplies my superior palpebra. And very important structure it supplies is, if you take an eye, okay, this fleshy part of the eye, you can able to see some fleshy part of the eye somewhere here. This is your lacrimal caruncle, right? This is my lacrimal caruncle, and I have some lacrimal sac surrounding it. Fine. So this infratrochlear nerve, it goes and supplies to the lacrimal sac and to the lacrimal caruncle. Okay, this is my where is it? Okay, infraorbital. And this nasociliary nerves, if you see, it has two, it again divides into two ways. Okay, one somewhere above and one is below. Just have a closer look at it. Imagine that my cornea is present here. I have my cornea, right? So let me draw it again for you. So just imagine that this is the eyeball which I have drawn there, and my nasociliary nerves comes, one supplies the infratrochlear and it again divides into two. So as I said, imagine this is my cornea, right? So what happens, this aspect, the lower aspect which I have drawn here, it is accompanied by few other nerves. It is accompanied by parasympathetic nerves as well as the sympathetic nerves, and it runs through the sclera, it runs through the cornea and it supplies my cornea. Fine. So I call this bunch as short ciliary nerves. Fine. And as I said, one goes up. This nerve is accompanied only by sympathetic nerve fibers and it also supplies my cornea. I call it as long ciliary nerve. Okay, so I will definitely repeat once I finish all. So nasociliary, it divides into two. Again, the lower part which is accompanied by my sympathetic as well as parasympathetic nerves, I call, and it pierces the cornea and it supplies the cornea. I call this a short ciliary nerve, and one is accompanied only by my sympathetic nerve fibers. I call it as long ciliary nerves. Okay, now one part of this nasociliary nerve, it goes up to my ethmoid bone, right? So just to make it clear, this is my ethmoid. Fine. So this is my ethmoid, and if you take a closer look at it, you are again, it divides into two branches. Okay, it divides into posterior ethmoidal nerve, which is supplies my ethmoidal hair sinus, and your anterior ethmoidal nerve. Fine, this is a posterior ethmoidal nerve. So as you can see, this you have a lot of olfactory foramens, your olfactory nerves enters, and this is your crista galli. It's a cribriform plate. Fine. So immediately beneath this bone, you see your nasal cavity, isn't it? You see your nasal cavity, and this anterior ethmoidal nerve, it enters my nasal cavity and it divides into three branches. One supplies the medial aspect, we call it as the medial nasal branch. and another one enters the lateral aspect. I call it as lateral nasal branch, and one supplies my tip of the nose. I call it as external nasal branch. Right, so this completes the ophthalmic nerve, its branches, its divisions. Okay, let me recall. First, basically I have three nucleus of trigeminal, and it enters the trigeminal ganglion. And what happens, since it is about the ophthalmic nerve, it enters the cavernous sinus, and via supraorbital fissure it divides into three. The main three branches, your lacrimal, frontal, and nasociliary. Very important. Fine. So lacrimal nerve, it's very simple. It goes and supplies my lacrimal gland, right? So especially on the temporal side, it goes and supplies my lacrimal gland, temporal side, and it also supplies my skin over my eyelid. And if you look at my frontal, one runs above the trochlear. I call it as supratrochlear. It goes and supplies my skin over the eyelids. It supplies my palpebral conjunctiva. It goes and supplies my skin over the forehead. Another one of branch of the frontal nerve is a supraorbital nerve. As you can see here, this supraorbital nerve also supplies my skin over the eyelid, also supplies my palpebral conjunctiva and the skin of the forehead. But it runs all the way to my vertex, till the vertex. Right. So coming to the next branch, the nasociliary branch. The nasociliary branch, as I said, one runs below the trochlear. I call it as infratrochlear. And if you look at the another one branch, it is accompanied by your sympathetic, parasympathetic, as well as sympathetic nerves. So I call this as short ciliary. Another one is accompanied only by the sympathetic nerve system. I call it as long ciliary nerves. So your short ciliary and long ciliary. Okay. Another branch is your ethmoidal. So your posterior ethmoidal and anterior ethmoidal. Posterior ethmoidal basically supplies your ethmoidal sinus, and anterior ethmoidal, it runs and it supplies your nasal cavity, your medial nasal, your lateral nasal, and your external nasal. So this completes part 1 of trigeminal nerve. That's ophthalmic nerve, and hope you all get an overview of what is ophthalmic nerve. And thank you for watching this video, guys. Hope it was helpful, and please share with your friends.